In Book 2 of Plato's Republic, Plato introduces a problem that's come to be called the Ring of Gyges. Okay, it's a myth. Plato used a number of myths that were well known in his time to illustrate philosophical points. Some of these would have been lost to us if Plato had not decided that they were good metaphors for the point that he wanted to make. Perhaps the most famous is the legend of the lost continent of Atlantis. I don't know if you knew that, but Plato's Timaeus, one of his later dialogues, uses the story of Atlantis as a philosophical parable, and that is the earliest account we have of that legend. He apparently believes that everyone is going to already know the story, so he can just give some basic features and then reflect on the meaning of the story. Any reference we have to the lost continent of Atlantis is either later than Plato or points directly to Plato. So had he not recorded that story, which apparently was well known in his time, we wouldn't have that at all. Now, perhaps not as well known, but perhaps even more influential, is this myth of the Ring of Gyges. It basically goes like this. I don't bother to assign the passage from Book 2 of the Republic because it is so short. Okay, it is recounted in the Sturba book. But there's an earthquake, and a fissure opens up in the ground. A shepherd who's been tending his flock nearby goes to take a look in the fissure, just out of curiosity. Now, please don't import any sort of pastoral idealism or romanticism because he is a shepherd. We have certain emotive connotations to that, many of them from the so-called Romantic era in Western art or Western literature particularly. But this was an absolutely commonplace job in the time and place that Plato's writing. Okay, imagine, if you will, that this fellow is a retail clerk. Okay, or a financial clerk in some insurance company. The point of calling him a shepherd is that he's just very, very ordinary. And that's crucial to understanding the meaning of the story. Well, looking in that fissure, he finds a ring. Again, out of curiosity, he puts it on, finds if he turns it one way, he becomes invisible, turns it back the other way, he's visible again. And given the way the rest of the story falls out by invisible, we should interpret that to mean undetectable. He can't be detected in any way, although the term literally means invisible. Well, at first it's just a curiosity for him. But what he finds is that no one, while he's got the ring in the proper position, nobody knows that it is he who is doing the things that are happening. He will not be held accountable for anything he does while he's got the ring on. And he can essentially get away with anything, because who's going to know it was him? Who's going to know that he was the one who did it? He ends up killing the king, seducing the queen, doing all kinds of things that, as an ordinary shepherd, he would have thought were awful, were just terrible. But if you're not accountable for anything, the temptation is to push the envelope a little further, and then a little further, and then a little further, and then a little further, until finally you're doing things you never imagined yourself capable of doing. Now, part of this, of course, is that the Greeks want to point out, as did other ancient thinkers such as Confucius, that accountability is absolutely crucial to civilized life. Accountability is crucial to morality. That without accountability, many people will do just anything at all. In fact, Sigmund Freud considers the notion that, although Freud thinks that religion is superstition, Freud considers the proposition that some people have proposed that it's a useful fiction because if you think there is an all-powerful God watching you all the time, you're more likely to behave yourself. Even if you can get away with it in human affairs, ultimately you're not going to get away with it. Well, Freud rejects that notion, and I certainly don't want to say that. I don't want to simply enthrone that as a correct interpretation. But I mean, I've seen particularly couples who consider themselves to be very religious using that as a means of disciplining their children. God can see you. God's going to punish you for this if you don't change your ways or whatever. And certainly there are plenty of sermons being preached around the world in any number of different religious traditions that essentially say that you will be held accountable, even if other human beings don't discover it. God sees you. Well, what if you just don't believe that? Or what if you believe you have a get-out-of-jail-free card, so to speak? I know the magic handshakes, the magic words, the magic rituals. I know how to, I know how to wash away whatever I did and essentially be unaccountable. This is not an orthodox interpretation of religious morality, but you can see that in practice. It would seem that many people do this. Yeah, okay, fine. So I'm gonna do something that I hold to be wrong, but I will just ask for forgiveness, and then I'll be forgiven. I could just go back to my old ways. Interestingly, I don't want to spend too much time talking about religion because this is not philosophy of religion. Interestingly, there's a viewpoint that is sometimes called the antinomian heresy. Okay. It was rejected by the medieval church, and that is, the notion is that because I have faith that I will be forgiven, I need only ask for forgiveness. I can basically go out and sin for all I'm worth. It's a sin of pride to think that my own actions are going to save me. I'm just saved by grace. Okay. Now, the more common, at least theologically more common interpretation is you can be forgiven, but forgiven is predicated upon repentance. That is, you actually have to genuinely be sorry and genuinely want to abandon the error of your ways. And if you're just basically saying, shrugging it off, saying I've got a get out of jail free card, that's not going to cut it. As Hamlet's uncle says, my prayers fly up, my thoughts remain below. Prayers without thoughts ne'er to heaven go. Okay. Well, Singer does consider the influence of religion upon the moral beliefs of everyday people. Religion is losing its hold on vast numbers of people, and yet even in countries where religion is very strong, you'll find that that's taking place. Spiritual, not religious, has been called the fastest growing faith in the United States. Okay. And the number of atheists in the United States, according to the most recent polls I've seen, has multiplied tremendously. Why is that? Well, Singer would say one reason for that is that, we expected that religion would help us to be better people, and we see so many people who claim to speak for religion who are, in fact, not people we admire, not people we would want to emulate. And those who do admire and emulate them endorse behavior that is dangerous and, in some cases, deplorable. So, Ring of Gyges essentially is a parable about how crucial accountability is. Okay? How a lack of accountability, never being held to task for anything you do, eventually can turn an ordinary person into a monster. Now, the Ring of Invisibility, certainly you can see what an important part of literature that's been. Okay? Harry Potter has that cloak of invisibility. Okay, the H.G. Wells wrote a classic science fiction novel, very directly influenced by the Ring of Gyges, which is called The Invisible Man. It's been retold a number of times in various different forms. It's been made into some classic movies and some very bad movies. There was a really bad version of The Invisible Man made about a decade ago, starring Kevin Bacon. I'm not saying it was bad because Kevin Bacon was in it. The movie was bad because, as people pointed out, the original story is about how being invisible eventually leads the scientist who becomes invisible into becoming a monster. The character played by Kevin Bacon in this film was a complete monster to begin with, was a borderline criminal to begin with. So once he gets the power of invisibility, he's already a sociopath, but now he's an invisible sociopath. Well, la-di-da, that teaches us nothing. It teaches us don't put powerful weapons into the hands of people who are not trustable. So we didn't know that. The classic science fiction version of The Invisible Man that was made many decades ago, the formula the scientist uses to make himself invisible begins to affect him neurologically. And again, it's a better film, but again, it totally misses the point. Okay, in the story, what turns him into a monster step by step, inch by inch, is that he can do anything he wants and never be held accountable for it. The temptation gets to be more and more and more and more because he's getting away with everything. Okay, that's the point the Greeks want to make with this myth. We have to be accountable. Okay, now apply this, as Singer wants to our economic system. It's been said that for the past 40, 50 years, we've converted ourselves more and more into a system where the more money you have, the less accountable you are. And the poorer you are, the more accountable you will be held. Okay, that in other words, the policies, the laws, the economic institutions have been stacking the deck that you will not be held accountable if you have sufficient money, if you have sufficient power. Again, as Horatio says to Hamlet, needs no ghost to come from the grave to tell us this, my lord. Well, actually, yes, it does, because particularly if you were born after the 1980s, you may not remember that it was an anomaly to not be held responsible. Okay, we always thought that the powerful, those with many resources, the well-connected, could get away with things, but eventually you could catch up with them too, and you could make them pay the price. What's the good of that? The good of that is to ensure that people behave in a way that is reciprocal, fair, honest, that they keep their social contract. We don't want to rewrite the social contract so that only the powerless are held accountable, whereas the privileged are less and less accountable. So you see what happens. If you encourage people to be sociopaths, so that is to not care about the effect of their actions on others, to reward them for sociopathy, you will eventually have your institutions run by sociopaths who are very well rewarded for what they're doing. Being wealthy can be a ring of Gyges. Belonging to any privileged group can be a ring of Gyges. I can't be held accountable because I belong to this tribe or that tribe. Okay? And it can be race, it can be gender, it can be religion, it can be nationality, it can be socioeconomic status, it could be education. Okay, every tribe wants to hold every other tribe accountable while writing themselves a free pass. And that way lies madness, the same kind of madness the Greeks predicted with the myth of the Ring of Gyges. This is Singer's point. Okay. Now, the question on the final exam is, if you had the Ring of Gyges, what would you do, what should you do, and why? And examine that from the point of view of a number of different philosophical strategies, ethical strategies that we've looked at during the semester. Okay. Now, don't give short shrift to any part of that question. Think carefully about each part of that question. First time I asked that question on an exam, I had one student who began by saying, well, if I had the Ring of Gyges, the first thing I'd do is hang out for a week in the ladies' dressing room at the Gap. And then I would get on a plane for Texas without buying a ticket, and I would hang out in the shower room of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. And I thought, okay, this is pretty disgusting, but when are you going to get to the what should I do? And unfortunately, he never did. He just got deeper and deeper and deeper into that voyeuristic fantasy. Okay, well, what you'd be tempted to do usually has something to do with money or with sex or with vengeance. Okay? Wow, if I could get away with it, I would fill in all those things that you know you probably shouldn't do, even if you could. Okay? Um, no, actually, the whole narrative he was making could have been looked at philosophically. He could have said, "I would be. This is what I would be tempted to do." However, what would Socrates say about that? Am I expediting the good? What goods am I expediting? Am I behaving disrespectfully toward people, even if they don't know about it? Will that inculcate uh, habits of character in myself and in my conduct that, unforeseen consequences that I probably should try to avoid? Am I, to use Kantian terms, treating other people merely as a means and not respecting them as an end? Is this just basically a lack of human respect? If you were a utilitarian, you'd be asking, well, am I promoting any good? I'm promoting my own pleasure, increasing my own hedons. And if I'm undetectable, whoever I'm peeping at is never going to know about it. And so I'm not causing any emotional pain or fear or whatever to that person, as long as that person doesn't find out about it. So really, am I doing any harm? I'm increasing my pleasure without doing any harm. Well, but if you're a rule utilitarian, you might say, we want to respect other people's privacy and the integrity of their own person, and it's good that we have a rule that insists upon that. And it's not, there are very likely bad consequences if we weaken those rules. So in other words, there are lots and lots and lots of ways to examine the morality of what he said he was inclined to do, but he never got around to that examination. So I don't tell you that story simply to entertain you. I tell you that story as a sort of a cautionary tale. Be sure you're giving sufficient attention to every part of that question. And be honest about the what would you do. Another way to answer that question badly is to be glib about it. I can't count the number of times I've had a student say something to the effect of, if I had the ring of Gyges, I would use it to help the poor. Really? How? What can you do for the poor as an invisible person that you couldn't do as a visible person? Whatever it is you were going to do with the ring of Gyges, why aren't you doing it now? You can't just leave it at that. Oh, I'd use it to help the poor. Why? The poor really don't like to look at you? Whew, boy, that's a relief. We don't have to look at that guy anymore. That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay. You have to do better than that. Someone once said, and I commend the person for at least putting some thought into it, if I had the ring of Gyges, I would go into the inner city, steal all the drugs, all the street drugs, all the drug money, and all the guns, and I would throw them all in the river. Okay, so okay, you at least were thinking about it, but you didn't think that through well enough. First of all, you're really going to pollute that river, right? The person you're stealing from is pretty low on the food chain. Okay, and that person and his family are now going to be maybe murdered by whoever is just above them on the food chain in the whole complex relationship of how drugs get to the streets. George Carlin, the comedian and social critic, once said, illegal drugs are a billion-dollar business. That's why the war on drugs is concentrating on the inner city. That's where the billionaires live, right? Of course, he's being ironic. Of course, we go after those who are least powerful. Now you have no money. You can't return the money you were paid. You can't return the drugs because you don't have them, and you can't defend yourself and your family because you have no gun. And the people above you on the food chain are just going to find somebody else to distribute the drugs, and you'll actually be a lesson. Don't betray us this way. Don't double cross us this way, or you and your family are dead. Not only that, can you imagine throwing a handgun and a bunch of cocaine into the river, and a day later a catfish climbing up onto shore, brandishing a gun? You throw that hook in here again. Well, okay, you get the point. What would you do? What should you do? And why? And show you've learned something from the various strategies we've looked at by way of answering those questions. Another thing that you should maybe consider not saying is a number of people have said, well, I would sneak into high-level meetings in political and corporate America and find out their secrets, and I would let everybody know those secrets. Well, you probably wouldn't be saying anything that wasn't already suggested by some conspiracy theorist, and you'd be in the position of you can't give any sort of validation, any sort of evidence that these things were actually said. What are you going to say? I was invisible and I said it on the meeting and they didn't know it. Okay, you can't make yourself a credible source without blowing your cover. And given how many bizarre conspiracy theories there are out there at any given moment, without giving some credible evidence, you're just another drop in the bucket. So why would anybody listen? Okay. Now, we understand? Okay. Now let's talk about ultimate values versus ultimate choices versus restricted choices. Singer talks, the first part of the book, he talks a lot about this. And essentially, his thesis for the book is that our ultimate choices, which in other contexts we've called core values, remember this from situation ethics, right? What are your bedrock values that should guide all your applied choices, if you will. All right. Singer says we are schizophrenic in our ultimate choices as a society at this point. On the one hand, we have our traditional Judeo-Christian values and our Greco-Roman values that emphasize community, loyalty, accountability, decency, okay, altruism. On the other hand, we have ethical egoism, which since at least the 1980s has been a major player in American politics, American religion, certainly American economic policy. What's in it for me? As long as I'm getting what I want, why should I care about you? There's a book that was published in the 90s called CEOs and Sociopaths. It's written by a psychiatrist who was doing work on the question, a question similar to what Singer's examining, which is, are we in fact rewarding sociopathic behavior with our current economic conditions? He interviewed a number of very successful CEOs. Okay, I remember particularly one top executive for Bank of America, after Bank of America had been busted for predatory lending. Predatory lending is basically a simplified explanation. You send your salespeople to talk elderly people, particularly widows who own their homes, into getting a second mortgage. They don't need a second mortgage, but you just tell them what a wonderful advantage that would be if they had a second mortgage. You essentially trick them into signing up for a second mortgage that you anticipate they will not be able to make the payments. When they default on that second mortgage, you take their home away from them. Now, here's someone who has worked all their life for this home. They and their deceased spouse have worked a lifetime for this home. They have some security in their old age. They're retiring to that home. They figure they're going to live there the rest of their life. You trick them into a deal that allows you to take it away from them. That was your intention all along. And then, of course, once you've taken it away, you sell the properties to developers and you make a nice, tidy profit on that. But in the meantime, these people are left who were set for the rest of their lives, who would have lived comfortably for their remaining years, are basically on the street and broke. Well, the CEO was asked by in the interview by the psychiatrist, when you think about harming these people, do you lose any sleep over that? Does it ever bother you? And the CEO just laughed and said, no, why should it bother me? And basically, gave a few platitudes worthy of Ayn Rand or Hobbes about, everybody's at war with everybody else, and you just take whatever you can get, and you do whatever you can get away with. So I don't regret the harm I did to these innocent people, because after all, I was trying to make a profit, and that justifies everything else. We have no values other than making a profit. There is no good other than our level of material consumption, and I am therefore entitled to maximize my material consumption, even at the cost of great harm to other people, because I subscribe to no communal or altruistic values that say I should engage in empathy, respect, and reciprocity, and that I should be accountable for my actions. No. I can make a better profit if I don't care about anyone, if I have no respect for other humans, and essentially see them, contrary to Kant, see them as purely as a means, not as having any intrinsic value. And my only concern is I want to do it in a way that I can get away with it. In Book 1 of the Republic, Cephalus, the elderly friend of Socrates, says that if you've lived a decent life, a just life, then when you're approaching the end of your life, you know that death is not that far away. You'll have peace of mind. You can say, I've done no great wrongs. My soul will enter intact into the next life, and so forth. He's a nice man, but they're very bad arguments. What if I don't believe there's an afterlife? What if I believe this is all there is? If the only thing making me behave decently is my worrying about an afterlife, then if I don't believe in an afterlife, I'm fine. Or if I'm just too stupid to make the connection between what I do and the results of and the consequences of what I do, I'm shielded by my stupidity. My stupidity becomes a ring of Gyges. If I believe, on the other hand, that if I can get away with it, I'm entitled to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to, like the CEO of Bank of America, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Akira Kurosawa, you watched Rashomon, right, by Akira Kurosawa. He did another film called The Bad Sleep Well, in which he addresses exactly this kind of problem. The hero who's fighting against corruption, against a violent gangster network, is killed. At the end, he's killed, left to die. Cut to the fellow who's the head of this underworld gang, tucking himself in, turning off the light, and peacefully going to sleep. He's done all these evil things. He's not going to lose any sleep over it. Well, you'll recall one of the first things we looked at, looking at Weston's book, this so-called tit-for-tat strategy, and I had you read the chapter in Singer as well about tit-for-tat, reciprocal exchange, how to actually get people to the table and enforce it. You have to reward positive behavior, but you also have to punish in some way unconstructive behavior. If people are in fact disrupting the reciprocal flow, disrupting the social contract, disrupting the social order, you have to let them know there will be consequences. If in fact you remove their accountability, you have removed from many people any incentive to behave decently. And if you in fact are rewarding people for not behaving decently, if you're offering no reward for decent behavior, What do you think the results of that will be? Okay. Ultimate choices are our core values. Restricted choices are the day-to-day decisions we make based on those ultimate choices. If I believe in empathy and respect, then particular concrete choices I make during the day will be guided by those values. If I do not believe in empathy and respect, then particular concrete choices I will make during the day will in fact ignore empathy and respect. If I believe in reciprocity as a core value, that's going to guide the kinds of decisions I make on a day-to-day basis, by my day-to-day relationships, my business dealings, who I vote for, how I treat people. If I don't believe in that, that's also going to have its consequences. Now, it should be perhaps a no-brainer that if we reward the behavior that's going to hurt us and we don't reward the behavior that would benefit us, that situation is going to become very uncomfortable for a long time. I would offer the suggestion that perhaps that is one reason why so many politicians use scapegoating as a major tool. If I can make you, in fact, not hate me for your suffering, even though I'm the one profiting, if I can make you hate some third party that probably had nothing to do with it, whew, ring of Gyges. We call that key jangling, okay? It's been called key jangling recently. What is key jangling? Well, what are you paying attention to? The motion and the noise. If I can distract you, that distraction becomes a ring of Gyges. You're not going to hold me accountable because you're not going to notice what I'm doing. Okay? It's been said we are an angry culture, getting angrier all the time. You remember the video we watched, the retired CIA analyst saying, everybody thinks he's the good guy. Okay? Bertrand Russell made a humorous remark that's been called Russell's declension. I am steadfast. You are stubborn. He is a pig-headed fool. It can be exactly the same behavior, but in me it's steadfast, it's a virtue. In you, it's just annoying. I'm being steadfast. I'm holding steadfast to my principles. You, on the other hand, are just being annoying and unwilling to compromise. Now, this other guy, he's just an idiot. Well, okay, let's do that with anger. I have righteous anger. You have anger management issues, and that person is a dangerous maniac. It's maybe exactly the same behavior. Everybody thinks their anger is righteous anger. A very dear friend of mine who I respect very much used to say in a political context, anger is a righteous fire that can burn away injustice. I always used to say, the people who believe the opposite of what you believe also think their anger is a righteous fire that will burn away the injustice of you and what you'd like to do. Okay? In this case, it was feminism versus sexism, okay? Well, if I have feminist anger, that is not only justified, it's a very good thing that will change social conditions. Okay, now take a look at the people who are most trying to turn back the gains in women's rights, in women's autonomy, who are most sexist in their views. They also are very angry, and they also believe that their anger is a righteous fire to burn away the iniquity of your views and your actions. Okay? Maybe we all need to calm down and listen to each other. Maybe we all need to calm down and say, you know what? Maybe some of my own point of view is not evidence-based. Maybe some of your point of view is evidence-based. Maybe we both need to be more attentive to the facts and less to the jangling keys. It's simply a physiological fact that the angrier you get, the more the parts of your brain associated with higher level reasoning shut down, the more primitive parts of your brain take over. Is that likely to yield us viable solutions to complex problems? No, we'll oversimplify the problems. We'll blame people. We'll get angry with them, and we'll be sure that if we could just have license to beat the daylights out of this third party, even if they are irrelevant and have no role in your misery, if I could just beat the daylights out of them, everything would be fine. Lyndon Johnson, who was President of the United States, as you doubtless know, after John Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson, who had been vice president, became president. Well, for many years before that, he was in Congress and was a very powerful member of Congress. He was from Texas, and he was once asked, why is it that so many people in Texas who are poor, poor white people, powerless, disadvantaged, being exploited and taken advantage of, why is it that they will consistently vote against their own interest? They will consistently support people who are exploiting or harming them. And Johnson replied something like this. He said, if you tell the lowest white man that he is better than the highest black man, just because he's white, hell, he'll not only vote for you, he'll empty his pockets for you. Okay, well, so much for anger being a righteous fire. This Tibetan proverb that trying to solve your problem by getting angry is like picking up a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at your enemy. And you realize too late that you burned your own hand. Bruce Lee, you know who Bruce Lee was, right? The great martial arts master, and on account of being his martial arts master, a star of martial arts movies, Bruce Lee was fond of saying, the one who gets angry loses the fight. Why? Because you at least have your wits about you. So there's something to be gained by getting our core choices clear, and by making sure that we look at the relationship between our restricted choices, our day-to-day choices, and making sure that they are as much as possible in harmony with those core values, and considering those who have said that such things as empathy, respect, reciprocity, and accountability have to be in those core values, or civilized relationships will not be possible. So, Singer says, look, we have what we need already. We have what we need already in our heritage. People have always understood, in American culture he's talking about, he is himself Australian, but he's taught at Princeton for over a decade now. He says, look, we in the West, particularly in the United States, already know what it is to depend on each other. Elizabeth Warren, as senator before she was a presidential candidate, this is by no means an endorsement of Elizabeth Warren, or Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign. Elizabeth Warren said something to the effect of, if you start a business, if you create goods or services that benefit society, and you also become wealthy doing that, you didn't do that by yourself. You did that because there is a social situation, what we've been calling a social contract, that makes it possible for you to do that. And that social contract, that social order, is made possible through the cooperative efforts of innumerable people. Okay? Yeah, but I created this product in my garage, and you know what? You used, you relied on the power company, police, fire, utilities, roads. The fact that there was a grocery store where you could go and buy food, you didn't have to. Well, I can't create this software product because I have to tend to my fields because otherwise I'll starve. We don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in a very complex, interdependent social web. Respecting that respecting that fact and understanding that we should have some gratitude to the others who make up the rest of that web has always been a part of American culture. It's what de Tocqueville, in his book on the American Republic, called Enlightened SelfInterest. He said, America is great because America is good. When America ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. How is it that she's good? People understand my success depends on a whole lot of other people making their contribution. A rising tide raises all boats, as we put it before. Therefore, I have both an altruistic and a self-interested reason for maintaining that social order, for maintaining decency between people, to maintaining reciprocity and mutual respect. I will benefit, others will benefit. If in fact I see myself as a part of an interdependent whole, I'm going to do better than if I delude myself into thinking, no, I just did this in a vacuum. If you ask very successful people, Bill Gates is one who comes to mind, how he managed to do what he did. One thing he will talk about very quickly is his team. I could not have done this without my team. I had to have very good people working cooperatively with me and with each other, mutually supporting. I didn't get there by myself. Okay, it is perplexing that in America, where we practically make a religion, or at least a religious fetish, out of sports, where we so tout teamwork, yet if we talk about the social order, we talk about the economy, and we talk about teamwork, people get very upset, as if that's going to somehow restrict them. No, in fact, you can't win in this game without your team. The team wins, or nobody wins. Okay, I used to say, this is now a historical artifact to say this, but I used to say, teaching in Massachusetts, can Tom Brady go out on the field all by himself and win the Super Bowl? And I would usually have a few students in the class and go, well, maybe, no, it doesn't work like that, okay? Working as a team, we can do things like in rural America in historical times, bucket brigades, right? That was an important part in the early colonial days. Towns are made of wooden buildings that were very close together. If anything caught fire, the whole town was in danger. You needed bucket brigades. You need people who are already ready to act together, to work as a team. In order to put the fires out, you needed people who were willing to work as a team to defend the city, by forming militias. You needed people to do all kinds of things as a team. If you fell and broke your leg during harvest time, you could count on the fact that your neighbors would harvest your crops for you, because it was understood that's the way our community works. If I fell and broke my leg, you would be there harvesting my crops for me too. We support each other. We're in this together. This is one of the fallacies of, if you will, applied egoism, the notion that I am simply this self-sufficient, heroic person who accomplished everything, not because of any unearned privilege, not because of the contributions of many people. No, I did it in a vacuum all by myself. No, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. It's an almost childlike understanding of how the world works. So, enlightened self-interest means that we understand that we depend on each other, and that if we can rely on each other, if we can rely on things such as reciprocity and accountability, we're all going to be better off in the end. And the degree to which we weaken that, for whatever reason, either the temptations of greed or the temptations of anger or whatever, the degree to which we weaken that is the degree to which we make ourselves vulnerable to be harmed and exploited. So, a lot to think about and a lot to apply.